Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to talk to Zach today. Zach is a co-founder and CEO of Rhumbix. Zach, welcome to having this discussion.
Thanks, Joyce. Excited to be here and looking forward to the chat.
Tell us more about your motivation of starting Rhumbix.
Absolutely. So prior to starting Rhumbix, I spent about a decade in the industry, actually managing construction on three different continents, US, Africa, and South America, and really saw the same kind of persistent problems globally in construction. And actually, my first job in construction back in 2006, we had a cloud-based project management system that was abandoned on the job site because the internet bandwidth speeds were too slow to even upload a single photo. So my first introduction to project management was a largely administrative role, running around paperwork, scanning it, getting signatures, very cumbersome and inefficient way of processing data. Fast forward 7, 8 years, I was working at the world's largest copper mine in northern Chile on a $3.5 billion job site with 7,000 workers working every day. And our primary source of data that we needed to help manage budget and schedule was coming from 1,000 paper time cards handwritten in Chilean Spanish being submitted every day. And so that caused a latency of about 2 to 3 weeks to even get the data in a format that we were able to analyze. And a lot of our audit of the data found out that it was incorrectly labeled in terms of cost codes. And so long story short, it was just almost a decade in the industry, just multiple different projects on multiple continents, and seeing the same challenges. And really, technology was a very, very kind of easy way to solve a lot of those problems. By 2013, 10 years ago, when I'm sitting at that copper mine, most all the workers had smartphones and were comfortable using them, but they had not yet been deployed in terms of a business enterprise tool. And so that's what we set out to do with Rhumbix.
That's amazing background and story. So how have you taken that learning and that experience to Rhumbix? So, tell us what Rhumbix does today, what problem it solves for customer, and maybe give us an example or two about the use case.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rhumbix is a labor and resource management platform for the construction industry. So put simply, we help companies track their most valuable resources, labor, equipment, and materials. We do that via mobile phones and smartphones and iPads and tablets out in the field, collecting data from the field workers, foremen, superintendents. That flows real-time data up into management to be able to get real-time insights into project performance, labor productivity, compliance risk, et cetera. And so we've had the good fortune to be deployed on a lot of very, very kind of well-known projects. If you've been following any of the news with the Madison Square Garden sphere that was recently lit up for the first time in Las Vegas, we were deployed across 36 trade contractors on that project every day, tracking labor, material, and equipment utilization. And other projects were currently being used on the new Buffalo Bills Stadium there in New York. We were used on the SoFi Rams Stadium down in Los Angeles, and have the good fortune of being on a lot of good, real big, publicly focused mega projects all around the country.
Maybe before we go to the next question, Zach, for those in listening to this or watching this that who don't necessarily understand construction, so maybe tell us a bit more about why is it challenging and why is it so important to understand labor as a starting point in the field, as for its utilization, project success, investment in those large scale properties and stadiums, as you point out. Tell us a bit more about that problem, and then it helps us to understand how Rhumbix is delivering this solution in the field where these constructions are taking place.
Absolutely. McKinsey's done some great studies really showing labor productivity in the construction industry over the years, and it's been stagnant for the better part of 40, 50, 60 years relative to every other industry. And so a lot of the challenges that exist in construction, one of the primary ones is every project's different. Every project's unique. There's a different design. There's a different cast of characters in terms of the subcontractors that perform that work. So it is this kind of crazy orchestra that the general contractors are trying to manage in order to deliver to the owners. And so where the missing gap has always been is being able to have quick feedback cycle from your actuals to plan to be able to compare those. Often that's done, 1 to 2 months in arrears, kind of historically, if at all. And so what we do is provide real-time data around, labor, equipment, and material utilization, which collectively, are 70, 80% of total project cost, to be able to help companies know, how well they're tracking to their plan in real time so that you can make adjustments while you still have the opportunity to affect project outcomes in a positive way versus catching that mistake or catching something too late in the game to be able to actually take corrective action.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense, like as you describe this, because like every worker has a phone, and they're able to do this in real time. And you're helping the general contractors and others who are managing these projects to understand where assets are, how they're being used, where are they used, how much they're being used, and their people. And then be able to take all those data then to do the right analytics and so forth, and make better decisions, right? And to do benchmarking and so forth. So
absolutely. The number one software in the construction industry is still Excel, and Excel is still a primary tool for data capture. And it is a great tool. It's very flexible and configurable, but you don't have a lot of continuity of data, the ability to control the data that's being captured. This is not, Office 365 Excel. This is spreadsheets on hard drives on locally computers on the job site. So you really lose that ability to benchmark cross-project, cross-crew. You don't have the ability to actually turn data into insights, which is, I think, a very huge opportunity in the near term for the construction industry as they've begun digitizing and connecting these workflows. The next step is then how do you take that data and be able to turn it into meaningful insights for improving project performance?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting. Like in my world, I call that kind of you're providing the ground truth, but also like data collection, data ingestion, managing data compliance, quality, all in one, and then apply that domain knowledge to that. So that's awesome. Before we go back and talk about construction and Rhumbix in general, I want to talk about you and leadership. You have amazing background with your founding team, and I don't know, you introduce yourself that way, but you're a veteran, you went to best business school in the world, and then you started Rhumbix. Like, tell us more about kind of that journey as it also tied to leadership. And what would you like to kind of share in terms of leadership lessons and management philosophy?
No, I love the question because leadership is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And, really at Stanford was the first time I dove into understanding the difference between leadership and management, both from an academic perspective and an experiential perspective. And put simply, leadership is trying to get a group of people to go from point A to point B. Management is getting everything to fit into a nice little bento box and, be very well organized. And so they're very two fundamentally different topics and subjects that have different skill sets and requirements that I think oftentimes get conflated. And so leadership, super important for an early stage startup. And I think the military was an incredible training ground for leading a startup. As an early stage startup, you're going to have limited resources. You're going to be underpaying people and overworking them, which is more or less every day in the military. And so you learn a lot of different leadership techniques, the concept of intrinsic motivation and really kind of understanding what drives people internally, and being able to tap into that and align intrinsic motivation towards a vision, an outcome, a goal that you're trying to hit as a team, is a big part of my leadership style. Another one that would just be broadly categorized as servant leadership. I am not the expert. I've never worked at a software company. I haven't written a single line of code for Rhumbix. My job is to help the company and the team understand where we're trying to go, what we're trying to do, and have them communicate what are the problems, what are the hurdles, what are the obstacles that I can remove, and or what support do you need, so that I can kind of more lead from the back, and let the folks on our team do what they do best, and just get obstacles out of their way so they can move as quickly as possible towards the next product release, that next deployment, whatever it is.
That's awesome. And I see that, from you in terms of kind of inspiring people, even people who have never worked in construction or worked with people in construction, like they come to Rhumbix and they're able to apply their domain expertise from other functional areas and build the solutions that you just talked about in Rhumbix and see them deployed in the field. Kind of behind the scenes, obviously, because we see the stadium, we don't see how it all come together. And there is this piece of software and data solution that is orchestrating a lot of these things in the background.
Now, I think a great example of that is our CTO, Rob, actually came to us from the media and entertainment side of Autodesk. He joined via an acquisition that they made with a company, ShotGrid, that basically helped stop motion animation companies manage where are the puppets, where are the costumes, who needs to be where, schedule, equipment, materials, resources. And so his background was extremely relevant in terms of the problems that we're trying to solve in the construction industry are very analogous to problems that, in this case, the media and entertainment industry went through a similar technology adoption life cycle and digitization process, in the past 10 to 15 years. And so, now we're able to educate him on, the unique aspects of the construction industry that he needs to design around, but a ton of his past experiences is relevant in terms of how to build efficient systems to manage complex processes with multiple stakeholders, which is exactly what we do at Rhumbix.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's a great example for folks who are thinking about getting into startups, entrepreneurship, and finding ways to contribute, perhaps in an area where they're not familiar with, but have a lot of transferable expertise. So talking about entrepreneurship, you've been an entrepreneur for many years. You studied that, as you said, after leaving the military and served. What are some of the lessons in entrepreneurship that you wish you knew, years back?
Yeah. I decided for personal reasons to go into becoming an entrepreneur because I wanted to be on a steep learning curve and challenge myself. And that curve's been 10 years long now, and there's not a day or week that goes by that I'm not challenged and learning something new. So very hard to distill it into a short list, but I think some of my most some of the biggest takeaways I've had, the first one that comes to mind, I used to do a lot of like high alpine mountaineering and hiking mountains, and it's this concept of the entrepreneurial journey is a series of false summits. So in mountaineering, a lot of times you'll get up to what you think is the peak of a hill or a mountain, only to find you got this little stretch, and then there's another hill and an incline that you got to go up. And so it's really important, especially in within the company, to really align people's expectations around this being a marathon and not a sprint. If from the mountaineering analogy, if you're expending all of your gas and effort to get to that first peak, you've got nothing left to keep going. And so I think, gearing the company to understand that, we're going to work hard, we're going to work fast, but you have to take care of yourselves. You have to, speak up when you need time off, when you need to set barriers and boundaries, to ensure that you've got a really good work-life balance to be able to continue to work in a fast-paced startup environment for years on end. And I've seen consistently people that have not done that experience burnout, and burnout's real, and startup fatigue is real. It's certainly, especially also for people jumping into a startup for the first time, it can be a very, very different, business environment than they're used to. So, being aware of the false peaks and making sure the team's preparing to run a marathon and not sprints. A couple other ones, don't sweat easily reversible decisions. Make them move fast and also measure outcomes. everyone's always going to have a lot of opinions, and that's great. But especially as a founder and a leader, outcomes are measurable and very concrete. And to the extent that you can generate outcomes and focus on those as an unbiased measure of whether something was successful or not, helps remove the emotion from the room in terms of a lot of decision making. I could go on and on. There's a ton. Delight your customers constantly, surprise them, bear hug them. No startup exists without customers. I think fundraising is not a goal. Oftentimes it just moves the goalpost further down the road for you. And so, really that should never be the focus or the goal or the outcome. It's really, how do you quantifiably deliver value to your customers? And then what portion of that are you capturing back into the business?
Yeah, I love those. And, I see you practice those in the company. And one thing I often say is that people who are not working startups or as kind of deeply or kind of being on the entrepreneur journey for a while, see the the popular press and talk about XYZ raising huge rounds, and that's a huge accomplishment. But in some ways, getting the money into the door is the easy part, but building the company every day, 365, delighting the customer, making those decisions, managing all your stakeholders, and to a point, be able to do that without experiencing burnout is a big thing to be able to manage, and do that also for others in your company, and building that culture, that motivation, which you talked about earlier. It's a big accomplishment.
No, that's definitely another learning I've had. Tech news is loud, it's vocal, and it's got a survivorship bias. So you're always hearing about all the people that are raising money, while you're, working to make payroll. And so the reality is it's kind of the ducks on a pond analogy. Everyone looks, still and calm on top, but below the water, they're all frantically pedaling to their feet to stay afloat. And so it's important to focus on the things that you can control. I think it's important to be aware of industry trends and shifts, and especially a CEO needs to be attuned with what's going on in the capital markets, especially now, as fundraising is one of the few things that you can't outsource or delegate to other people in the business. But if all you do is read the headlines, it's going to be a very depressing slog to get through, because
there are many cycles, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And startup game it's a long-term one. You mentioned a little bit about this, Zach, in terms of cultivating like the right culture in the company. I had a sense when we were doing due diligence about the sort of culture you want to build, given your experience again in the military and afterward, just diverse experience and a lot of world experience. So how do you think culture play into startup, and how do you kind of foster that in practice?
Yeah. That's another great lesson learned. Is it's very easy with the list of hundreds of things that you need to do in the early stages of a company to not invest in culture. And I think one of my business school professors, actually our first board director, Chuck Holloway from Stanford, as class at Stanford, he said, your company is going to have a culture. You can either be intentional about it or not, but a culture is going to develop one way or the other. So I think culture can be a very, very powerful X factor and differentiator. And so we chose to invest very early on in culture. And so I think of a culture as an operating system for a business. It's a set of values, but the culture is how people's activities and actions and behaviors day to day reinforce those values. And so our core values are message of Garcia, trust and transparency, workers first, and gains. And I remember a period early on where we weren't going to have a functionality in the product that we'd promised a customer, and we were having a discussion around whether or not to let them know, or maybe they won't notice. And it was very easy to say, hey, trust and transparency is a core value. That's something we live by, not only internally, but how we interact with our customers. And we were forthcoming and upright with that customer. And he was like, no, thank you so much for letting me know. Like, not a big deal at all. Like, we're all good. And so it's a culture can be a very easy way to govern hard decisions where if there's a disagreement, you can fall back to, hey, what is our culture, what is our values, is one path forward more aligned with those than the others. And so I think there's a ton of other benefits in terms of recruiting, hiring, and retention, but just in terms of how the business operates, again, if you don't proactively invest in building a culture, like, one will develop, and the worst case is that a culture develops that is not helpful to building the business, or could be actually detrimental to doing it. And that's just gonna decrease your chances of success in the long term.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I see that. And so I think it's great. So let's come back to construction. Now that we have you here as an expert. So you mentioned, like, McKinsey talked about construction industry in some of these market reports, and construction has been viewed as one of the least digitized industries. And given the years you've been in the industry, how have you seen the speed of innovation changing over the course of this period?
Yeah, it's and I mean, I go all the way back to 2006 when I was scanning stuff into PDFs and pushing paper for signatures. And so on a 17-year time horizon, the last 10 years has been a huge increase in the speed of technology adoption, the fact that actually software is deployed on most job sites. But as an industry, I do think it's still a nascent industry for technology adoption. Every day, we're still replacing paper, pencil, and Excel out on job sites. I think the speed of company formation also accelerated faster than the industry was able to ingest and digest new software and new technologies. So a lot of companies began getting tech fatigue. They went from no technology to, hey, I need you to pilot this. I need you to pilot this. Throw this 360 camera on your hard hat. I need you to walk around the job site every day. And these are all asks that were in addition to the person's regular responsibilities around project management, being a field engineer, et cetera. So it's in the kind of awkward teenage years, I would say, of kind of figuring things out. But where companies have been catching up is putting the process in place. How do we evaluate a new technology? How do we procure it? I think one of the most important things that I encourage every company to do is come up with an SOP for how do we deploy software, and then how do we retrain people on it. The industry, like most industries, had a lot of perpetual seat license software. So we're still very much in the wave of mobile and cloud in terms of the technologies that, and I think there's tons of opportunities to still just roll out cloud-based workflows, tech-enabled services in the industry. But until the construction companies are at that point where they've got the in-house people that can comfortably write calls off of APIs to connect the data, that's still a missing piece of the puzzle that I think that muscle will get developed over time. But it does limit the speed at which we're able to advance. But that said, it's light years ahead of 2006 and where we were. And I do think there's actually some pretty unique opportunities in the near term, robotics being one. I've talked, the unemployment rate in construction is 0. There's 650,000 job openings that we don't have men and women to fill in the United States alone. And so robotics, we're starting to see it get on the job site, site layout with Dusty Robotics. Hilti has an overhead drilling robot, the J-Bot, and Dusty Robotics has a robotic drywall finisher where the robots are helping address very mundane tasks that a lot of the craft and crews don't like doing. In the use case for overhead drilling, very hard on the body from a musculoskeletal perspective. And a lot of folks who've been in the trades their entire career will have to retire early because of physical disability. So I do think actually robotics is kind of one of those ones that's really leaped ahead. And been a no-brainer in a lot of cases, and the industry is figuring out how to make it work. I know some of the robots are registered and pay union dues, and
That
working
is
through.
interesting. I did not know about that, Zach.
Yeah. It's a heavily unionized industry, and that's a big part of the construction industry, and has been since the advent of labor unions. But they are finding a way to work,
Yeah,
together, pay dues.
yeah, yeah. No, that is so fascinating, and which also lead to the kind of a related question is on the data side. In other industries, you start to have folks like the chief data officer or data science teams or data management, and they look at their data maturity. What does that look like in the construction industry?
Yeah, it's a great question, and that as it relates to data, very much in terms of the technology adoption cycle is the very, very innovators and early, not even the early adopters yet. Suffolk Construction out of Boston was first company that I am aware of that hired a chief data officer. A woman, Jit Key, with a PhD in data science, and I do know, I'll call it 10 to 15 companies now that have a data strategy, are looking at building out a data warehouse where they're able to stitch together all the data from all of the projects, all the different pieces of software, because all of them fully believe in the ability to then apply machine learning and predictive algorithms to that data to be able to help them improve how they design and execute construction in the future. So there's a handful of companies kind of leading the way there, and there's a lot of stuff the industry still has to figure out. There's been multiple attempts at standardization of data formats and interoperability of data, but it continues to be a big challenge, and one that we'll continue to struggle with. But there are more middleware ecosystems coming in place, folks like Agave API that's helping to make low code, no code ways to stitch data together. So definitely moving in the right direction, but this kind of holy grail of being able to have all the business insights at your fingertips from the data is still probably 3 to 5 years out for a lot of companies, if not longer, because they're still in I need to digitize paper-based workflows to get the data generated in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's so fascinating because you earlier you talk about kind of, first of all, you need to have the blueprints, and then you have to build, and then you have the build phase, and then there is, I'm sure, the maintenance, and then there is the management of this asset, and they're all separate workflows or major tracks in construction, and like all of them need data. And Rhumbix, kind of, if we kind of think about what you said, is they all need data, and you're kind of addressing what I call kind of the first and second mile of data in the build phase, and then they can potentially use that later, not just to really understand the construction, but also the management, and then having those data as historicals to really inform them what they can do similarly or differently in the future, which they, today, it's, as you say, you're still fighting against Excel and paper and pencil, right?
Absolutely. All the large language models are going to require fine tuning. And so it's a combination of qualitative and quantitative data. We focus on what all happened on the job site. Production was down that day. Was it because there was a late delivery? Was it because there was a crew in the way? Was it because there was a design error and we had to stop work and go back to the engineer of record to say, hey, can you tell me if it was supposed to be X or Y? And all of that contextual data is needed to enable to be able to get the right answer. But kind of you said, is the first and second mile of capturing it and structuring it in a way that you'll be able to apply it, over the years and decades to come, to get to that kind of holy grail of, I know what happened every day, and then actually the schedule for the next day got auto adjusted based on all the real-time inputs without anyone manually doing any work to generate that. And I do think we'll get there, but it's just a journey. And part of what it gets me excited every day is just helping the industry move forward on that journey.
Yeah, I think so. I think everybody has experience of you know, just even a small scale construction in an apartment, a house, like takes time. We have so many different parts. Imagine you do this for airport or stadium.
Yeah,
And every single data point matters, and every single contribution from the person matters to accumulate to the final thing that we all see above the ground. So it's a
absolutely.
multi-billion-dollar efforts, and you can't risk those sort of delays. You need to be able to track every day on multiple components.
On the copper mine project, 7,000 workers, 8,000 workers, every day, 64,000 job hours have been expended to change the site from the day before. And so when you think about, that's certainly, mega project scale, but every project, regardless of the size, is getting changed every day. And there's a supply chain, a very disparate, disaggregated supply chain of materials and equipment and subcontractors, and that has to make it all work. And so, technology, I think, will dramatically help bring down the cost of construction in the future. But we're still in kind of those fundamental building block phases of the industry's transformation.
Yeah. So let's end on kind of final question. I'm sure you get asked of this many times a day, which is, is AI going to take jobs away in construction? What does it mean? So tell us about what you think.
Yeah, I was at a conference recently, and I heard a great quote that was, AI is not necessarily going to take away jobs, but employees who know how to use AI will replace employees that don't know how to use AI. And so I think there's it's not hard to come up with a list of 50 use cases for AI in construction right out of the gate. I think Chat GPT takes a prompt and then predicts the next word in the sentence and generates a response. Mid-Journey predicts the next pixel. You give it a prompt. Like, it's very easy to think about. Similar to Mid-Journey, you can tell it, show me a 100-story high rise in the middle of Cincinnati, Ohio, where I grew up, on with the sunset in August, and bouncing off the windows. You'll get that graphic. And so the jump to here's the specs for a building that I need, give me the design, is an easy one to make conceptually. Practice is harder, but absolutely we'll get there. I think a lot of the planning, the design work is very ripe for generative AI applications, but most of what we've seen in terms of AI is really focused on a lot of the knowledge worker jobs. I think it will help lower the cost of construction, but the skilled craft workforce that we need is still going to be needed for decades, if not centuries to come, to actually physically construct the buildings. And there was actually a funny project in Antwerp, Belgium, that put a big sign outside the construction site that said, hey, Chat GPT, can you finish this job? And so very tongue-in-cheek, kind of pushing back against AI. I don't see AI, placing concrete, framing out walls anytime soon. Like I said, I think robotics will be in there for human assist, really where there's just a massive labor shortage. But certainly on the engineering, architectural design, scheduling, planning, estimating, costing side of the house, I think huge opportunities for generative AI to play a big role there in the future of construction.
Very interesting. Well, Zach, thank you so much for all your perspectives, and tell us more about Rhumbix. And I know that when I walk the streets of New York and I look at all these major constructions of high rises, and I see people, or the construction workers with mobile apps, or the foreman with their mobile apps, and I wonder, and I see like some of them actually use Rhumbix, and it's amazing to see the impact that Rhumbix is making in construction, and also to hear your personal journey in what you did before, serving our country, and then changing your career by going back to business school and then building a company from scratch. I think it's an amazing entrepreneur story. And thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Of course. Thanks, Joyce. Great chatting with you. And thanks again for all the help and support you've provided personally, and 10-4 has provided as an investor.